From 1939 to 1945, hundreds of airfields throughout Britain housed tens of thousands of Allied airmen and women who served and often died in both offensive and defensive operations to bring victory in the Second World War. Duxford Airfield's part in that story is virtually unique. From the early Royal Air Force Spitfires of 1938 through to the late Mark United States Army Air Force Mustangs of 1945, few other British military airfields share such a distinguished and varied history. Today, Duxford is a dynamic branch of the Imperial War Museum. Many of its historic buildings are preserved, and it retains the atmosphere of a Second World War fighter station. But its history goes back to the end of the First World War. In 1917, two sites for training airfields were chosen south of Cambridge at Duxford and Falmere. Duxford became a Royal Air Force station in April 1918.
There's an exceptional group of First World War buildings surviving at Duxford today, and foremost amongst these are the original aeroplane hangars with their really impressive Belfast truss roofs. And then behind those there's a whole range of First World War training buildings, workshops, and this original MT yard. But together, they give you a fantastic impression of what a whole First World War airfield would look like.
After the war in 1919, flying ceased at both Duxford and Falmere. Their future looked uncertain. However, Duxford reopened in 1920 as the home of No. 2 Flying Training School. But Falmere was considered surplus to requirements. In 1922, it was demolished and the land returned to agriculture. Duxford became a fighter airfield in 1923, and the station was developed in the interwar years.
Well, the First World War buildings carried on being used, but there are also a number of new ones. A new operations block was opened in 1928, the guard room in 1933, and the station headquarters in 1934. But as the Nazi threat grew in the late 30s, so a whole new range of buildings were developed as well.
In 1936, the RAF's air defence of Great Britain was reorganised, and Fighter Command, under Sir Hugh Dowding, was formed. RAF expansion accelerated. Airfields were built, existing ones improved, the numbers of airmen were increased, and new squadrons formed.
One's training, and also really the first 2 years at Duxford in a fighter squadron, it was just like being in a public school atmosphere.
Yes, you would do a certain amount of formation flying. Then the next time you were sent up to do aerobatics, and there was night flying, of course.
Tactically, from the point of view of fighting, we didn't know any difference because we didn't know how to fight in a gauntlet. Nobody told us.
When the competitions were coming up, we'd do a lot of practice. For example, the flight attack competition, which we won year after year, as far as I remember.
That, honestly, was the only real training any of us had.
Hendon, of course, we took part in every year, especially Broadhurst and these three tied-together people.
But life sort of floated along, and we were equipped with the Gloucester Gauntlet.
They were still in the silver colours to be able to recognise them if they'd crashed.
Delightful twin-winged biplane, single engine, open cockpit.
We were issued with dope and brushes, and we had to paint these old planes into wartime colours of camouflage.
And we loved those aeroplanes.
In 1938, Duxford's No. 19 and 66 squadrons became the first RAF units to start re-equipping with the now legendary Supermarine Spitfire. On the 4th of August 1938, Supermarine test pilot Geoffrey Quill delivered Duxford's first Spitfire to 19 Squadron.
To our great surprise, the beautiful little monoplane landed, went to 19 Squadron. Another one landed, came to 66 Squadron.
It was such an awful change from a biplane that wandered along at 180 miles an hour.
But it was a totally different sort of machine.
8 feet of engine in front of you, and tremendous power.
But it was a wonderful aeroplane. There was no question about it. They looked right.
The remarkable thing was that there was only one accident.
I must confess I didn't terribly like the Spitfire to begin with, but then I had a reason not to, because the first flight I ever did in one, I turned it upside down on the aerodrome landing.
It was a bit frightening to start with, because we had the two-bladed fixed pitch prop. You went as far back as you could and opened up on the brakes and then let it go. And so the little hawthorn hedge at the far on the western side of Duxford, and when you saw that you were going through that, unless you did something, you eased it back. Once you were up, she was an absolute delight to fly. But well, of course, that didn't last long. When they fitted the three-bladed prop, everything changed.
There was quite a lot of small faults, so we did a lot of improvements to Spitfires at Duxford as we took them to bits and replaced them again, with the two engineers supervising from Rolls-Royce. All the same things were happening to 19 Squadron, but 19 Squadron was always on the alert.
With international tensions rising, speculation about a possible war with Germany grew.
You know, one had heard rumours about what the Germans were doing because we knew what they'd been doing in Spain.
I personally didn't think there was, and a lot of people didn't think there was going to be a war.
One or two people in the squadron took it deadly seriously. I won't say who they were, and were frightfully pompous about the whole thing. But the rest of us just sailed along. We flew when we had to fly, with, I mean, really no talk of a war or anything like that.
Duxford was on high alert during the Munich crisis of September 1938. 19 Squadron stood at readiness with its outdated gauntlets and only 3 of the new Supermarine Spitfire fighters.
Can you imagine if we had been sent off? The 3 Spitfires would have lost us. Within 5 minutes, they wouldn't have been able to see us.
I remember going to a football match at Arsenal with my then girlfriend, and I was called out of the football match. I had to give my name because there was a terrible sort of crisis going on. I think he was going into Czechoslovakia. But anyway, I was called out of that, and that sort of made one slightly realise that something was going to happen.
By the 4th of May 1939, Duxford squadrons were fully equipped with the Spitfire.
Well, I thought Duxford was a wonderful place, and when I found out that there were Spitfires, well, that was it.
When I first came here, all the Spitfires were kept in the hangar. In the morning, we used to push them out and line them up in a row outside. And then after a while, when they thought things were getting a bit hotter, we were dispersed all around the perimeter all the time.
In 1938 and 1939, Duxford prepared for war.
Just before the war, the buildings were camouflaged and shelters were dug to protect personnel in the event of air raids. And then the aircraft themselves were dispersed out across the airfield, where special pens were constructed to protect them from bomb blast. And alongside those, a series of huts were constructed for the pilots.
The need for a satellite airfield away from the main station became apparent, and the farmland at Falmere, the site of Duxford's First World War twin airfield, was requisitioned again. On the 1st of September, Germany invaded Poland, and 2 days later, Britain declared war on Germany. Buildings were sandbagged to protect them from aerial attack, and roadblocks set up around the station.